The Gundam Trading Card game is here, and I have been playing so much of it this weekend, and I've got my top 7 tips for new players to get as good as possible at Gundam as quickly as possible. So make sure to give the video a like and subscribe if you want more Gundam content, as well as Riftbound, Disney Arcana, Star Wars Unlimited, all kinds of trading card game stuff. Thank you to the channel sponsor Card Market, which is the biggest online marketplace for trading cards in Europe. Tip number 1 is maximizing the potential of your EX resource. Your EX resource is arguably the most tricky thing to use, but also the most important thing to use in Gundam Trading Card game, because there's always going to be an EX resource in every game you play. The player going second gets access to this special resource, and it is incredibly powerful, but only if you use it wisely. If, for example, on your first turn when you're going second, you have your EX resource and your normal resource, you play a level 2 Gundam, which costs 2, you immediately lose that EX resource, and it didn't really achieve that much for you. What I would advise instead is, if you're going second, on your first turn, you're level 2 with your normal resource and your EX resource. Can you play a level 2 character which costs just 1 resource? That means you can leave your EX resource ready, and therefore the next turn, instead of playing a level 2 character, you can play a level 3. And again, look at this. It's a level 3 character that costs 2. So then the next turn, I could play a level 4 character and a level 5. And then you pick your moment. Once you're a high enough level, then you can use that EX resource to play a pilot, for example, extra, and gain that extra little bit of tempo. Trying to utilize that EX resource is so crucial in Gundam. In my experience, it's better to go second in this game because of how powerful that EX resource is. But if you're not going to use it wisely, you're going to really struggle to win consistently. Worth mentioning, there is other ways of getting the EX resource in ramp decks. In particular, the Wing Gundam in Burb mode is the big example of that, which is in one of the starter decks. I would try and advise, again, if you're using this card, you don't necessarily want to use your EX resource to play this Wing Gundam. You would rather try and save that EX resource. So let's say you're at level 4, then you pay 3 for this Wing Gundam. You leave that EX resource available because you can have more than one at once. So suddenly, you were at level 4, you play an EX resource from the Wing Gundam, you're at level 5, and then the next one you're going to be at level 6. So you can get huge ramp potential with this card, but if you use your EX resource to play this card, you potentially lose some of its value. So just worth bearing that in mind. You can have more than one. Tip number 2 is going to be all about pilots and linking pilots and pairing pilots and what the difference between those things are. Of course, in Gundam, you have your Gundams, but you also have your pilots, and meshing them together is key to success. And there's a little bit of confusion about what's the difference between a link and what's the difference between a pair. We're going to start off with maximizing the potential of a link pair. So a link pair is this bit at the bottom of the card here where you see the link arrow and then Amaro Ray. So this card here has a specific pilot which you can get the link pair. You can attach any pilot to this card, but you only get the link effect with specifically Amaro Ray. If you pair any other pilot to this, it is a pair, not a link. So you have a link, which is the specific named character or name tag, and then you have a pair, which is any pilot going onto any Gundam. A subtle but very important difference to understand. So if you look at Amaro Ray, this is the named linked pilot. If you link this, the effect that you get for any link pair is that that character can attack immediately. Often, and usually in the Gundam Trading Card game, when you play Gundam, you have to wait a turn before you can attack. But the most powerful part about that link effect is that it can attack immediately. This gives you huge tempo. It can surprise your opponent. And the Gundam Trading Card game really, in my experience so far, is quite fast-paced. And that little bit of extra tempo you can gain off a link pair is absolutely huge. And it's also worth mentioning then that you also have to try and find the right moment to do this link pair. It's not necessarily you just want to slam it down as soon as you've got it. If your opponent doesn't have anything valuable to attack, you might just be better off developing a Gundam which doesn't have a link available in your hand. And then the next turn, when there's a more attractive, more appealing trade that you can make, then you find that right moment to catch your opponent off guard and utilize the link pair. So that's tip 2. Maximize the link pair abilities because they're really, really crucial to succeeding in this game. Tip number 3 is quite similar because it still relates to pilots, but I wanted to talk about when to pair a pilot, which isn't a link. It's that subtle difference. When can you utilize that? Well, it's worth noting that some pilots and some cards have pair effects. So for example, this Gundam, when you pair it, you draw 1. Now, a link is also a pair. So for example, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, if you were to link Amaro Ray, it is still paired, right? So you will get both the effect of Amaro Ray and the effect of the Gundam, as well as the link effect. However, if I was to pair, let's say, this guy, Char, to it, I would get only the pair effect. It's a little bit confusing, but basically a link is a link and a pair is just a pair. That's the general gist of it. And for example, this Gundam has the effect that when you pair something, you draw 1. So if you were to pair Char, he is still going to get his attack ability, even though they're not a link pilot. But when is the right moment to pair a pilot? Because if you're pairing a pilot, it's not linking. You're not getting that immediate rush attack. You have to wait until the next turn. So for example, if I am at level 5, I could play this guy down and then immediately pair Char. But I wouldn't necessarily gain a lot from that because I don't get to rush in immediately, and my opponent actually gains a lot of extra information. I can no longer attach a different pilot to that Gundam, and therefore I'm giving my opponent a lot of extra information. So what you would prefer to do then is play this guy down, play this Gundam MA form down, and then on the next turn, if you would still like to, you can attach Char, and then you can attack with it, because those extra stats that you get from this pilot change the numbers and can catch your opponent off guard. They might have looked at your board, done all the maths and said, okay, they can't trade that officially, but then suddenly you surprise them with this extra pilot, and you can attack immediately after pairing, as long as the summoning sickness of the initial Gundam, which would be this, because you played it the previous turn, is there. So the general gist is, if you've got a link pilot, you would prefer to do it link and make that link when it's going to surprise your opponent for a favorable trade. Whereas if you've got a pair pilot, just wait to pair it until the following turn. Usually, it's not always going to be the case, but usually because you're giving your opponent less information and it gives yourself more flexibility. And sometimes if you've got that link pair available, you don't have to go for it right away. Set something else up first which doesn't have that link, and then the following turn you gain a huge amount of tempo when you pull off that link pair and catch your opponent off guard. So that's tip 2 and 3, maximizing the potential of links and pairs and the differences between the two, which I think is one of the more confusing parts of this video. Tip number 4 also relates to pilots in a way, because it's about these command cards, and the main thing in particular is action effects and main effects, because some pilots, like this pilot here, can be used as both a command card or a pilot, and the main keyword means that you can do it during your turn and you just play this as a command card. So this card, in my own turn, I could pay 1 resource to deal 1 damage to a rested unit, or I could attach it, or I could pair it as a pilot, and it would give my card an extra 1 health point. That's it. You can't use this as a pilot and get the main effect. I think a lot of people at my locals were a bit confused by that. This command card, you can use it either as a command or as a pilot. This main effect is not applicable when it's a pilot. But there's also some other keywords, which is this action keyword. If you see indignation here, it's a pretty similar card. You can use it as a pilot for 1 attack point, or you can use it as a command. But this command can be used in the main phase, which is during your turn, but this action keyword is incredibly powerful in the Gundam trading card game, because this means that you can use it during your opponent's turn. So for example, if I spend 4 of my resources, but I have 1 still available, and then I pass my turn to you, I might have this indignation card in hand. So when you declare an attack, I can use the action effect and I can give one of my friendly units 2 extra attack points, catch you off guard, and suddenly you think that you've got an amazing trade and you're in a great position, and I surprise you with this action card. So if you can save some resources for the action cards in your hand, it's great to use them in your opponent's turn. We call this in other trading card games combat tricks, and they're often very, very powerful. It catches your opponent off guard, and maximizing the potential of these action effects in your opponent's turn is really, really important in Gundam Trading Card Game. But also by the same metric, being aware of when your opponent might have actions, if they have any resources which they haven't tapped or exhausted, you need to be wary of what action cards they might have. And of course, you know that your opponents could be playing 2 colors, so knowing what action cards are in the game and which cards that you need to play around and respect is going to be really helpful for getting better at this game. So that's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is going to be all about base cards. So of course you start the game with this EX base. It's a 0-3, but a lot of the other bases in the game have 5 HP. In an ideal world, what you would like to do is you would like to let your opponent remove this base and then play another base, because you can only have one base at a time. So let's say you're playing against me and you remove my EX base. The following turn, in an ideal world then, I would play a different kind of base, because that would give me an extra layer of protection. And while I lose a shield card, which is like 1 life, that 1 extra card in hand could be incredibly valuable. However, what I found quite interesting is that sometimes the more I played, I realized, well, okay, my opponent likely has a base card in their hand. So if I remove their EX base right now and I don't break through and remove any of the shields that they have, is it even worth it? Or am I better just leaving my cards ready, doing nothing? Because if I attack, let's say, for example, with my Zaku, which we looked at earlier on, it becomes quite vulnerable, right? I could use this and remove my opponent's base, but if I do, then this card's very vulnerable. They can remove it in a favorable way, and maybe they just play a base to immediately replace the EX base, and I actually didn't gain anything at all. So there's an interesting dynamic with this EX base and other base cards, which is that if you sink damage into them, but you don't touch any of the shields, you might actually be playing perfectly into your opponent's hands. So it's important to recognize, when are you going to rip through the base? When are you just going to sit and do nothing? And similarly, when is the right moment to replace your own base? A big mistake that I made in my starter deck tournament in the game that I lost, I was playing the Rush deck, and I had the EX base, and I had this base in hand, the red base here, and I had this base in hand as well. And I thought, well, I don't want to get rid of my EX base until my opponent just removes it, and then I'll put one of these bases down. But my opponent took advantage of that, never attacked my EX base, and I just ended up with like these 2 base cards in hand and wasting resources. Whereas what I should have done is played this Falmel, because it developed the board. It got me an extra Gundam down on the board. I was playing an aggro deck. I could have drawn a card from hand and have more options. So it is still sometimes worth replacing your base with one of these other bases, but it's finding out the right moment to do that. And there's a lot of mind games, and it's matchup dependent. Sometimes you're going to want to replace your base. Sometimes you're not going to want to replace your base. Sometimes you're going to want to remove your opponent's base. And sometimes you're just going to want to sit and wait for the right moment. And mastering that dynamic is going to help you a lot in the Gundam Trading Card Game. Tip number 6 is about the starter decks. And the starter decks, I've got one of each. I really like them. They seem pretty good. But they have unique cards. They have 2 legendary rares, or it might be limited rares, LR, within the starter deck. You have 2 different kinds, and each one has 2 copies of it. Now, these are limited only to those decks. So, for example, if you want a playset of the Wing Gundam here and a playset of the Tall Geese, then you're going to want to buy 2 of that starter deck, which I think is this one that I happen to have in my hands. It is the Wings of Advance, the blue and green. There is also other unique cards in the starter decks which are only in the starters, so that's worth bearing in mind as well. But particularly those LR cards, if there's one that you really want, it's going to be worth buying 2 copies of a starter deck. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the price of these. I think they're like $13 market price, which is really solid for a starter deck, and they played pretty well. So I think it's a good deal. Just pick up 2 and you're going to be good to go with that color combination of those legendary rares or limited rares that you really want. The final tip, in my opinion, is the one that I'm most excited to talk about because it might not be what you expect. And it's talking about the mechanic of Gundam and how I think that it's really punishing for bad deck building. Many of my regular viewers from other trading card games know that I am passionate about deck building. It's my favorite thing in trading card games. But in Gundam, I think a bad deck build is particularly punishing. And I'm going to explain why now. So in games like Disney Lorcana and Star Wars Unlimited, you have cards in your hand which you can put down onto the board face down and use them as resources. And in a game like One Piece, you have cards which can be played down onto the board, and you have cards which can be used as counter cards. In Gundam, neither of these mechanics exist. So, in my experience, a card that you have in your hand is a card that can only be used as a card that you play. So if you have a bad card in your deck, which is particularly situational, it's just going to get stuck in your hand. So bad cards in this game are really bad. Does that make sense? Because it's just going to be stuck in your hand. You can't use it for anything else. And therefore, it's going to be really important to build a clean, optimized deck. So you need to be really careful about what kind of cards you want to be playing. In the red-green aggro deck, for example, I had Char, but there was only 2 copies of the Link Gundam, and it just felt really awkward in my hand. I ended up with like 3 pilots in hand. I couldn't do anything, and I lost the game. So you need to be really, really careful about trying to build a deck which has a lot of links, a lot of pairs, enough Gundams, enough command cards, and really striking up that right balance. What that balance is right now, I don't know. I need to play and build more. At this point, I've only really played with the beta kit and the starter decks, but it's just something to bear in mind that the deck building in this game is going to be particularly punishing, particularly with your mulligan as well. The mulligan is quite risky, and bad cards in this game are really bad. I think that's my biggest takeaway. Now, it's also worth mentioning that you could play more situational cards, because while I say that you have to play a card that's in your hand, there is a card like this, like the Strike Gundam, which is in one of the starter decks, which we found to be one of the best cards in the starter deck pool, because you can play it, it's got decent stats, you draw a card and then discard 1. So filter effects like this might prove to be really powerful in the Gundam trading card game, because it allows you to play some more situational cards and just fix bad hands. You're going to end up with some hands where you have a bunch of pilots and no Gundams, and you're going to end up with some hands where you've got a bunch of Gundams and some pilots but no link effects. So I would imagine that cycle effects like this are particularly powerful in this game. So if you do want lots of situational tech cards for specific matchups, try and get some cycle cards like the Strike Gundam here. But that is all the tips I have for you in today's video. If you want me to do more tips for the Gundam Trading Card game, let me know. Give the video a like and let me know what is your top tip for the Gundam Trading Card game. Give the video a like and subscribe for more trading card game content. My name's Speci, and I'll see you very soon. Cheers.